Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being so compliant and sitting in this kind of main area, because of course, being level 2, we understand people are reluctant to come out to meetings. They want to keep safe. Not that you didn't want to keep safe, but you know what I mean. Some people are a bit more nervous about those sorts of things, and of course, maybe they had other things to do after being in lockdown in various forms for the last few weeks as well. So we will post this online, of course. So as we get underway today, first port of call, let's find someone that you're going to talk to today and go and say hello if you didn't come with somebody in particular. Find someone to say hello and ask them, what do you hope to get out of this seminar today? Building love for life. What's your kind of hope? You've lost your wife already. I don't know what happened. The seminar's a dismal failure right from the starting gates. Exactly. All right, go and ask each other, what do you hope to get out of today? So we get into it. So the nature of these sorts of seminars, I decided just by sort of partly structure is that because we do this in 3 parts, these are essentially 3 different talks, and each have sort of a key and central idea at the heart of them. So they're by no means kind of everything that's to be said about relationships. And when we're thinking about relationships today, while many of us will be thinking about primary relationships, romantic relationships, this stuff doesn't just apply to that. It applies to any kind of relationship that we are trying to cultivate with other human beings, whether that's with our children, our friends, our co-workers, our colleagues, whoever it might be. This stuff is going to apply in some way. And so, of course, it's always tempting when you're hearing content to be thinking about the other person. But because you're the one who's here today, I want to really invite you to focus your attention onto yourself, to be more conscious of what it is you see about yourself in what you're hearing, and less concerned about what you see about others. Because it's very tempting in a relationship seminar to be thinking, well, I wish they'd come and heard this. That would have been really helpful for them. And meantime, you're not getting as much out of it because you're too busy thinking about somebody else, what they may or may not have got out of the process. So let's try and focus on our part in relationships. And even as a sort of opening idea, we could start by saying it this way: that when I change me, I change we. When I change me, I change we. When I bring a different version of myself into the relationship, because relationships are dynamic in nature, the relationship has already shifted. And if I've shifted in a positive direction, there's a good chance the relationship has moved in that direction as well. So let's get into it. The first topic, and the topic of this first section today, is really about an area of relational psychology that I find time and time again is coming up, particularly in my work, mostly of course in couples counselling, but in all kinds of relationship problems. And it is the issue of attachment. In fact, I can go so far as to say, if I only got to know one thing about you in order to help you with your relationships, this is the one thing. If I only get one thing. I'd like to know more, but if I only get to know one thing, it's your attachment style. That's what I'm going to choose. That's going to give me more insight into the way you are in your relationships. And if I know your attachment style and the attachment style of the person that you are wanting to get closer to, whether that's a spouse, a romantic partner, a friend, a colleague, I'll be able to know critical things about what it's like to be in the midst between those 2 styles and how those 2 styles might interact with each other. So let's set this up and to sort of frame our conversation today with our first video around attachment style.
Everybody has their own style of bonding emotionally with the people in their lives. This is called attachment style, and it plays a central role in the healthiness of our relationships. Neuropsychologist Dr. Judy Ho is an expert in attachment theory, and in this series, she explains the types of attachment styles, where each one comes from, and how to recognize your own. Most importantly, she shares how to improve it in order to improve your relationships and enhance your mental wellness. Dr. Judy, I'm so glad that you get to talk to our audience about this topic, because it's the most requested topic I think we've had in the last year, probably.
So cool.
So let's talk about attachment theory. Where does it come from?
I am so excited about attachment theory because it does affect so many elements of your life, even as adults. But attachment theory is all about the fact that as infants and as very young children, we are helpless. So we need our caregivers to take care of us. So attachment theory is all about how we establish that relationship with our primary caregivers and whether or not that establishment is healthy or not, and how that influences how you function as a child, both mentally and physically, and again, pervades into your adulthood and career, in love, in friendships, and every other aspect of your life.
Do we know that it is affecting us, or is it affecting us subconsciously?
I think sometimes you don't realize it, and I think unless you hear the word attachment, or you've understood the term attachment, or have been spoken about to somebody in some way, you're not going to really know that that's attachment. But it will explain so many of your decisions in life. It explains why you're attracted to the people that you are. It sometimes even explains the type of work you do, and it explains the kind of friends you like to keep. So it really does affect so many areas of your life, which is why I think your viewers have requested it so much.
I talked to Ginger Z, she's the chief meteorologist at Good Morning America, and in her book, she mentioned that part of the reason she wanted to get into weather and become a scientist and be on television was to get this approval from her parents, because they always grew up watching the Weather Channel or watching the weather on TV, and she goes, well, if I'm on TV, then they will sit and watch me and I can add benefit to their life. And she goes, so here I am, I learned in therapy, I built an entire huge career based on this deep want to get my parents' approval.
Right, yeah, it totally makes sense. And she has really good insight about that. And I was gonna say too that people who've been to therapy generally know the term attachment, because probably at some point your therapist has mentioned it to you.
Mention attachment, or just ask about your parents?
Well, I think, well, both, you know, but I think most therapists want to mention attachment at some point. And it's so interesting that even the attachment relationship that you have with your therapist can really influence how well you do in the therapeutic process.
Now, it seems obvious to some, but why is this so critical to understand attachment theory?
I think it's really critical because it really talks about your template for building relationships with people, period. Because the relationship that a baby builds with its primary caregiver is literally the most important relationship at that time. And then over time, you still use that template. Even if as adults, you're no longer the helpless baby, you still use the same template over and over, because our human brains are so much better at a process called assimilation, which is whenever there's new information that comes in, you still absorb it into your existing schema or your existing worldview. And that gets established from your very first important relationship.
When you are fully educated on attachment theory, how will it impact the different areas of your life?
Well, first is you're going to have much more awareness about the things that you do and why you do them, and especially helpful when you're trying to change any unhelpful behaviors. People have come to me telling me that they keep having these unfulfilled relationships, and they keep having the same relationship over and over again. And once you understand that it might be linked to your attachment, that's step number one before you can make that positive change. So once you know that, you can actually start challenging any unhelpful attachment beliefs so that you can have better relationships and so that you can move on and achieve the goals that you want. I mean, a lot of people, because of their attachment issues, are afraid to just interact with life in general. So sometimes they hold themselves back even in careers, and they just end up having more of an unfulfilled existence overall, or even a tumultuous existence, as we'll talk about it later in the series.
We're going to go into all of the different types of attachment styles, but right now, can you just give a high-level overview on the different types that are out there?
Absolutely. So the types were first categorized by Mary Ainsworth, and this comes from John Bowlby's work in attachment, which started in the 1950s. Mary Ainsworth came later, around the 70s, and developed this strange situation where they observed babies and their parents and kind of developed these different ways to categorize the attachments. Now, the best kind of attachment is what's called secure attachment. When Mary Ainsworth did her study, she thought that 2/3 of people would have this attachment. Honestly, I think as further research has come, it's probably not true. I think it's actually more the minority than the majority. But aside from that, there's 3 other types of insecure attachment. And the first type is anxious preoccupied. So these are people who tend to be more clingy. They have a lot of needs that feel unaddressed, and they oftentimes will even have fantasy beliefs about what a relationship will do for their life.
I think I dated that person.
Yeah, I feel like we all did. I know people are like, which ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend is this one? And then we have the dismissive, avoidant, attached individuals who, as adults, tend to be much more independent. They tell themselves they don't really need relationships, and they tend to kind of escape situations where people want to express strong emotions. It makes them very, very uncomfortable. And then finally, we have the fearful avoidant type. And this type is sort of a combination of the two types we just talked about that are insecure, and they kind of go back and forth. So on the one hand, they really have this very conscious need to have deep relationships, but on the other hand, they're so afraid of abandonment that their behaviors are actually very erratic. So sometimes they act kind of clingy, other times they run away, and you can't predict them. And then, of course, going back to the securely attached, the whole idea is that these guys are able to be flexible in every relationship. They treat each relationship as it is, and they have flexible problem solving as opposed to this one-way approach to try to get their needs met. But as I mentioned, I think it's a lot less common than was originally thought.
Can people have a mixed bag of attachment styles?
I think so, and I think when you also break down attachment into the different domains of life, sometimes you can have a mixed bag, meaning that some people actually look kind of securely attached in their career. But when it comes to intimate relationships, that's where their true attachment, their deepest fears get realized.
Yes.
Because again, when it's something like a career, there's something that you're doing for that career. There's a job that you're doing, there's a performance aspect. And people who have insecure attachments can sometimes be secure in that domain because it still equates to them doing something.
Yes.
And so then when they earn respect or care or nurturance through that, they feel like they've earned it. They worked hard towards it. But with an intimate relationship, it's so much more difficult because it's kind of like, are you a lovable person at all?
Yeah.
Even if you do nothing. And that's where people's deepest fears lie, is their intimate relationships, because there's no place to hide.
So attachment styles aren't a diagnosable condition, but certainly they can influence a person's behavior later in life. And you mentioned in one of these attachment styles a fear of abandonment, which I know is one of the big symptoms for someone who has borderline personality disorder. So explain how understanding attachment styles can help people navigate the mental health, complications that exist out there.
Yeah, it's a really good point that you bring up, because basically, as I see it, attachment styles is one way to explain the etiology or causes of your mental health symptoms. So somebody who has borderline personality traits or the actual disorder, it's very likely that they have a fearful, avoidant attachment style. And that is one of the major causes that leads them to express that through the borderline symptoms. Somebody who has an anxious, preoccupied style, there's a lot of research that shows that that leads to anxiety disorders. That makes sense. And people who have the dismissive avoidant type, sometimes they become more narcissistic in nature, they become even maybe antisocial in nature when we talk about the personality spectrum. Sometimes they have difficulty putting themselves in other people's shoes, so they have sort of like a lower empathy that's associated with a number of different types of clinical conditions. And so, for sure, I think that it's really about understanding about causation and the factors that lead you to your mental health symptoms.
Excellent. Well, we're going to start this conversation in our next session talking about the secure attachment style.
All right, so here's that sort of high-level overview. Now we're going to drill down and understand each of those styles so that you can really identify what style best looks and reflects and identifies you and maybe the person who you want to be close to. Charlie Brown fans? Who's a Charlie Brown fan? Any Charlie Brown fans? Awesome. Is it possible? Can we turn the heater up? I'm going to get real hot real fast. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to use this graphic. This graphic I will give to you in a handout later today. And we're going to lay over the top of this graphic a bit of relational psychology called transactional analysis. And the combination of the two will make it really memorable as to what the issues are based on which style best describes you. And so we're going to start by looking at the secure quadrant up at the top left-hand corner there, Pip and Patty. And when we're thinking about this attachment style, so let's be clear, we're thinking about something that probably formed in the first 1,000 days of your life. And it formed as a result of some questions that every child has of their primary caregivers, of mum and dad. And that is, Are they there for me? Do they care about me and my feelings? And in particular, if I were afraid, and we're going to use this idea of being afraid, if I were afraid, could I count on mum and dad to be there for me? And if not, why not? Is it something about them? Is it something about me? Well, the result will be your attachment style. So, let's take a look at the only positive one of the bunch, unfortunately, and that is secure attachment. In childhood, this is this ability for the baby you'll see will explore novel environments, not disturbed too much by brief separations from mum, and quickly comforted when she returns. So let's play that out in a scenario. We're going to use the scenario of dropping a child off at kindergarten. For those of us who've had children or grandchildren, and we can remember what that is like, and others can certainly imagine. So, the securely attached child is dropped off at kindy, and when mum drives away, the child is upset for a little while. Upset that mum is no longer present, but calms down and is able to play with the other children. And then when mum comes back, oh, it's big hugs, reconciliation, yes, mum's back, happy days returns. Here's the logic in the child's heart, that being apart from mum doesn't really mean anything. I know that mum loves me just as much when she's down at Pack and Save as she does when she's sitting beside me. In other words, the securely attached child carries around the love of mum in their hearts, so that even when mum is present, the child can still feel mum's love. The child knows that if they were afraid, they could definitely count on mum if mum was around. Mum would certainly come and comfort me, support me, if she was around. The securely attached child knows that if mum isn't around and I get afraid, that I'll be okay while I'm waiting. That yeah, I prefer mum to comfort me, but I can be okay while I'm waiting. And this becomes a key sort of feature in adult relationships. So you'll see, let's take a look at this next slide, that they've developed this thing called emotional object permanence. If you've had a small child, you'll remember object permanence. Object permanence is the thing that is the reason that children or infants of a certain age think that peekaboo is hilarious. Why did babies like peekaboo? What are they giggling about? What do they think is happening in peekaboo? That you've disappeared. They do not yet possess object permanence. So when you put your hands in front of your face, the baby thinks, wow, you've disappeared. And then when your hands are pulled apart, wow, you reappeared. That's a cool trick. How'd you do that? You disappeared, you reappeared. You are clever. And then the child develops object permanence and stops laughing. So what does object permanence mean?
You know the object so even though you can't see it.
Right. It's this awareness that objects continue to exist even though I'm not able to see them.
Like the sunshine.
Well, like anything. Like I know that those chairs are still there even though I'm not looking at them. They have object permanence. Well, see, there's an emotional version of that called emotional object permanence. And that kind of looks like this. That I'm aware of the love of others even when they're not in the room. But many of us don't have good emotional object permanence. That when the people we love leave the room, it feels like their love leaves with them. And we're left feeling alone, disconnected. And we have trouble holding on to the feeling of their love. And so emotional object permanence is this key developmental skill that securely attached children carry with them throughout their life. And it's the reason that securely attached people are the ones who are able to navigate conflict with others. Because they know that the presence of a fight or an argument or a bump in the road doesn't mean this person doesn't love me anymore, because they actually hold the love of that person in their heart. And so they know that that love is worth fighting for, and so they'll want to fix the problem, address the issue, work on the stuff, right? That's the value of emotional object permanence. So let's lay over our first transactional analysis phrase. So you'll be able to guess that it'll be a variant of these two phrases in all of the quadrants. So for securely attached people, it's I'm okay and you're okay. I'm okay to be loved, I'm okay to look after myself if I get afraid. And you're okay to help me with my feelings. You're okay to be trusted, to be let in, to actually help me with what's going on inside of me. And so this is why securely attached people have the best relationships, because they allow people all the way in. But because of the I'm okay part, they also insist on being loved properly. Because they know they can survive without this relationship. So they insist on being loved properly. And so that's why they advocate for the relationship to be healthy. We'll notice with the other quadrants, they're less sure that they can live without the love, and therefore will put up with things that securely attached people would never put up with. And so the other quadrants, what's true is any love is better than no love. Even bad love, even toxic love. But for a securely attached person, no, I deserve to be treated well. Because remember, they're carrying around the love of mum and dad in their heart. They're speaking to themselves like a loving, nurturing parent. And so they kind of require other people to treat them well too. Now, you've probably guessed, since it's only a 1 out of 4, and the video did rightly say that although the original research thought that maybe 2/3 of us would be securely attached, it turns out that that's ambitious. Turns out that many of us have had different kinds of experiences. And what if we've worked out, rightly or wrongly, that mum and dad aren't really available? That they really can't be relied upon? That this child may decide that, you know what, I'll stop relying on other people. After all, what would be the point? They'd only disappoint me, they'd only let me down, they'd only prove to me that they're really not there for me. And so then they develop this avoidant attachment. So in childhood it's called avoidant, in adult life it's called dismissive. So these are the children at kindergarten, when mum drives away, they're not concerned at all. They're not remotely upset. And when mum returns, they're not that interested either. They're like, whatever, lady. Because the logic of the avoidant child is, other people aren't really there for me, so there's no point relying on them. It would only be a disappointment. And so what emerges in its place is self-reliance. If I can't really rely on others, I'll rely on me. And they start to develop a much more independent attitude to life, an independent attitude towards relationships. I don't need people to get very close to me because I don't really need people, because people really can't help me and people don't really want to help me. And so I won't really let people even help me if they try. And so this is the image that we might see, is the wall constructed around the heart of the avoidant person, keeping out the disappointment, keeping out the mistreatment. But the problem with walls, of course, is that they don't just keep out the bad stuff, do they? They're indiscriminate. The wall keeps out good stuff as well. And that means that the dismissive person, the avoidant person, is not really sure if they're loved, because they don't really let love come all the way into them. Because they've told themselves, I don't really need love. Or whatever love is, it isn't reliable enough, consistent enough to be bothered with. Now, at the risk of generalizations, what gender do you suspect I've seen more dismissives of? Males. Yeah. Males are much more likely to be dismissive. Much more likely to cultivate. Now, of course, there's some cultural behaviors towards boys as well. You know, don't cry, for example, is something that might be said that is toxic masculinity that says to boys, you know what, let's not do the feelings thing. And so this self-reliance, of course, may really serve the person in some other areas of their life. They might find that they're successful in their career, that they're able to get stuff done because they rely on themselves. They might even be really helpful to other people, like teammates. They really enjoy having a high-functioning, dismissive person on their team because that person just gets stuff done because they don't rely on anybody. They can be called upon. So the image that we might go with the wall is that of the gate. And the gate to their heart swings outward, happy to help others, really high-functioning person. But the gate doesn't swing inward. No, I don't let you in. And so if you're in a relationship with someone who is dismissive, avoidant, it may feel like you can get close, but you hit the wall, you hit the gate, but no closer. but they don't let you all the way in. They feel like there's this blockage to intimacy, this blockage to being known, and that's because they don't let the gate swing inward. And how might they appear to others if they're in a relationship with them? What might that look like to other people? If you keep encountering that. What might be the message that the closed gate sends? Right, maybe they don't love me because they're not letting me in. Yeah.
And when people get close to them, like, you know, like lovingly and that.
Yeah, sure. They won't let me in, and that feels terrible.
Guard comes up as soon as people try to get close to them.
Yeah. Looks guarded and protected, but what else? What might the person who's in a relationship with this start thinking about what the wall means, what the gate means about the relationship?
They don't really love me.
They don't really love me. Surely if they loved me, they'd let me in. Right? So we can see that the dismissive impulse actually pushes people away. The gate isn't neutral. The wall isn't neutral. It actually pushes others away because they have to interpret, why can't I get any closer? Do you not love me? Do you not want me? And of course, what might happen as a result of that to relationships? What might that person do?
You should have become very single.
Well, if indeed you even get married, what might happen to the relationship? It might disintegrate, which then, for the dismissive, how do they interpret that? I was right all along. Other people are unreliable. Look, she left me. I was right to have my gate. I was right to have my wall. It's worked again. This is the broken logic of the impulses of our attachment style. That suddenly we have caused the very thing that we're afraid of. So, this quadrant is I'm okay, you're not okay. I'm okay, thank you. I shall look after myself. I don't need other people. I will look after me. You, on the other hand, not okay. Don't trust you. Don't look to you. Don't get support from you. Don't even think to. The number of times in couples counselling where a dismissive person has basically said, but why? Why would I want to open the gate? Why would I be doing that? Like, and not maliciously, like incredulously. Like, Aaron, why would anyone do that? Like, they're so unfamiliar with intimacy that they cannot imagine what it would be like and why anybody would need it. Such is the strength and power of their self-reliance, but that same self-reliance is pushing other people away. Because it says you may come close, but no closer. And that's a very hard message for other people to decode. Why? Why can't I come any closer? So they have very shallow relationships. And they don't really mind if relationships end because they weren't counting on them to begin with. Would you believe that the research says that this is the most common attachment style for pastors? Isn't that interesting? To be standing in a church? Because pastors love for the gate to swing outward. Oh, I'll help other people. But not necessarily willing for the gate to swing in. And to be deeply loved by others. All right. The third option is this insecure, anxious attachment. So you've probably seen this as one of the most visible things. We'll see it all the time around small children because it is so visible. And that is the child that has to be peeled from mum's leg when taken to kindergarten, holding on for dear life. Don't make me go. Don't leave. Right? This child is traumatized by mum driving away. This is awful. And this child cries the whole time that mum is away, really, and may never really settle. And even when mum returns, they struggle to be comforted by mum. Such is the level of apprehension that has been triggered in them. You see, they experience this terrible feeling when the other person is away. What's the name of that feeling? You know what it's called? Abandonment. That might be how they interpret it.
Fear.
It's a kind of fear.
Rejection.
Again, they might interpret it as rejection. They experience separation anxiety. For those of us who have dogs, we may know a dog who has separation anxiety. We had a golden retriever named Gracie, and Gracie would absolutely dig up the carpet thanks to separation anxiety. Made it very difficult to ever be apart from this poor dog. She was very distressed, and so a lot of human beings. Because being apart triggers this sensation. A sensation that's often made sense of by saying, I'm abandoned, I'm rejected. That's the rational explanation the person might come up with, that the feeling is this separation anxiety. And let me give you the test of whether or not separation anxiety is a problem for you. If you text a friend at 9 o'clock in the morning and they don't reply until 4 o'clock that afternoon, a securely attached person is not bothered at all. No, they just haven't gotten back to me. But by 4 o'clock, the anxiously attached person is starting to say certain things. What are they saying to themselves? Maybe they hate me. They're never going to talk to me again. What did I do? Is there a problem? Is there some kind of thing going on? Right? They're absolutely tormented by the silence and start to construct this story. Something terrible is happening. Now, separation anxiety has two elements. One is this inability to understand what's going on for the other person. Does it mean something? And the other is this inability to comfort yourself whilst alone. That feeling alone feels like I'm abandoned, feels like I couldn't possibly cope, feels like if I was afraid, that'd be the end of me. I wouldn't be able to do it. And therefore, even though I'm not afraid, the thought that I might be afraid while you're away triggers being afraid, which I don't think I can cope with. So I have a really, really bad time.
Is it possible to move through these, like from one to the other as you kind of grow?
We'll answer that at the end. What might be the tactics that someone who experiences separation anxiety employs to try and avoid it occurring? What do you think they might do in relationships? Constant messaging, yeah. Lots of updates. Yeah.
Control?
Controlling behaviour, yeah. They could be incredibly bossy. I don't want to see you see your friends. I want you to stay with me.
Always available.
The control freak.
The control freak, yeah.
Always available.
Always available.
The should behavior.
Lots of shilling, yeah, lots of kind of maybe using some judgy kind of words and controlling tactics. What's on the other side of control that they might use? Or maybe just plain old passive, a real doormat. Whatever you want, real people pleaser. Whatever it takes to keep you happy, whatever it takes to keep you close, whatever you want, I'll do that. Anything to stop you being away. So they will potentially oscillate between those two extremes of either ultra compliance or ultra control, both attempts to keep the person close. Now, what's the response? Do people enjoy being clung to so tightly? What sorts of words do we use when we're on the receiving end of feeling like the person is clinging to us?
Give me some space.
Right. And we might describe the experience as being suffocated. Yes. And what might be my response to feeling suffocated? Pull away, the very thing that I want to happen. You notice these relationship impulses keep bringing about the situation we don't want to see happen. What gender do you suspect might be more prone to? Sadly, it has been my observation that it's often the female client who has a more anxious attachment style. And so men have a name for women like this in relationship. You won't like the name, ladies. How do we describe being in a relationship with a woman like this?
Needy.
Needy?
Needy.
High
Maintenance.
maintenance. High maintenance. I need to send 50 texts a day. Right? So remember how the securely attached person had this emotional object permanence? The anxiously attached person doesn't have it. So they need constant updates. Tell me that you love me. Tell me that you love me by being close. Tell me that you love me by keep answering every text. Tell me that you love me by favouring me over your friends or your family. Tell me that you love me, tell me that you love me, tell me that you love me. Because as soon as you stop telling me that you love me, I can't hold on to it. It feels like it slips through my fingers. Do you love me? Tell me again, tell me again, tell me again. I had the most beautiful experience as a counsellor recently around anxious attachment. I had this young man. This was the story at the beginning of his sessions. He said to me, Aaron, all my life I've been being abandoned. I said, no, tell me about that. He said, yeah, my grandmother looked after me. It was a different culture group. He said, my grandmother looked after me. Then at 5, she had to move to another city because she got a job as a nanny. And what else happened? Yeah, well, I was going to an international school, and the friends I would make, their parents would move to other countries, and then I would lose them, and they would abandon me. And so came these stories, and what do you think I'm thinking as I'm hearing these stories? There's no abandonment here, is there?
No.
I said, define abandonment. He said, people leaving. I said, oh, no. That's too broad. What's abandonment? People leaving me. Right. Which of those people left you? And you know what? He reviewed his entire life to age 25, and he could not find a single story of abandonment. And do you know that he changed just like that? His friend said to him that he gave up overnight the clingy, anxious behaviour. But he had cultivated a story. Because he kept experiencing separation anxiety. Because when grandma left, it felt like grandma's love left. Because friends moved away and it felt like their love left. He concluded this must mean that feeling is abandonment. He tried to make sense of it. Because that's what children do, that's what we all do. Try and make sense of what's happening to us. It meant, though, his relationship impulses were all built from this style. He was incredibly clingy. When we first started talking, it was all about the fact that he was so terribly disappointed that a friend of his had gotten a girlfriend. And this meant that said friend was no longer available for constant companionship. He wasn't getting updates anymore from the friend. Because for him, he could only know if the friend loved him when the friend was close to him. And if the friend was close to the girlfriend, that must mean something. Why? Because separation anxiety says it must mean something. I think you started to think about your own impulses in relationships. So, not surprisingly, it's flipped for the anxious, who in adult life are called preoccupied, because they're always thinking about relationships. Is everything okay? Have I said something? Have I done something? Do they love me? Do you not love me? Oh, probably the ones doing that, he loves me not, a lot. They mentally do that their whole life. He loves me not. Tortured by the instability of love. It feels like it goes all the time. Now, the most common combination I find in couples counselling, sometimes it's been reversed, but it is most commonly the dismissive man with the anxious woman. Can you imagine what that might be like? Turn to the person next to you and try and play that out. What do you think they would struggle with? How would things go for them? The anxious woman, the dismissive man. I hate to be gender stereotypical, but for the sake of discussion, so see if you can guess what they would struggle with. So the anxious person wants desperately to know that they're loved, but keeps bumping into the wall, keeps bumping into the closed gate, and freaks out. And the dismissive person's like, why are you being so crazy? Why do you need me to text you all the time? What's wrong with you? So they're sending the you're not okay signal. So look, check it out. You're not okay. Which the anxious person interprets as, I'm not okay. It's right. I'm not okay. Oh no, but I need you to keep telling me that you love me. Yeah, but this is too much for me. I'm locking the gate. I'm putting another padlock on the gate just to be sure, because lady, you are cray-cray. So she then dials it up. No. Open the gate. I need to know I'm loved. some turrets on the top of the wall and maybe some machine guns. Maybe we can keep this crazy person away. All right? Next thing, the dismissive person has built a moat between the gates and them, like, I'm back here now. They're retreating, getting further away from the action. Meantime, the anxiety is causing the preoccupied person to get louder, stop to get what I call tears and swears, what begin to happen. You didn't hear it the first time, my plea for intimacy, my plea for reassurance. So what if I cry? What if I'm louder? What if I start saying mean things? Well, you never loved me! And suddenly the relationship is in big trouble. And all because of attachment style. All because their impulses, their subconscious instincts in relationships were formed many years earlier by a mum and a dad and are now being played out in adult life. Right, so this is an incredibly common combination and causes huge trouble. So final quadrant, disorganized. And so disorganized is in fact, what sometimes called confused, is the combination of quadrants 2 and 3. So what happens when I'm not sure that I can rely on other people to care for me, but equally I'm not sure I know how to care for me? Well, all that's left is to be afraid a lot of the time. To believe that relationships are fundamentally flawed and fragile.
Sorry, Aaron, can you just repeat that? What happens if I'm not sure I can rely on others, and equally I'm not sure?
I can comfort myself, that I can care for me. That all that's left is to be afraid a lot of the time. And so, in adult life they're called fearfuls. And fearfuls believe that relationships are ending. That all relationships are ultimately fragile. And therefore, as the first sign of trouble, they'll often torch the village. They'll often end the relationship. Now, I'm a recovering fearful. So let me see if you can't work out what the fear, how I knew really how bad it was one day in a former life as a pastor, when I said to the leaders of our church, there are only two types of people at our church, those who have left and those who are going to leave. Everybody will hurt me in the end. Everybody will leave me in the end. And I heard myself say that, and I thought, oh dear, oh dear. Fearful impulses, believing that all bumps in the road are signs that it's ending. Let me give another example. So, my wife calls me into our home office one day to offer me some feedback about how I parented our son that day. Apparently, I'd been a little bit harsh. In light of my fearful impulse, what do I believe Debbie's really saying? Right, you're a terrible parent, the relationship's over. And so I left the office and my impulse was, I'm going to divorce Debbie, I'll get in first. And I'm sitting in the car and I caught myself. I thought, hold on. What if this is just your fearful talk? So I asked the important question. Did she tell you about the parenting because she wants to leave you, because she doesn't love you? No. No, the opposite's true. She's told me because she loves me and she wishes to help me be a better dad. But my impulse was exactly that. It was like the exact words. If you think I'm a terrible parent, you probably think the relationship's over and you wouldn't want me. And aha, we've finally heard it, haven't we? We've finally heard it, that that's what you were thinking about me, that you didn't want me all along. It's as I've always deeply suspected. The good news is that I've managed to learn how to get out of I'm not okay, you're not okay, into probably only the bottom of the secure attachment, not all the way in, but I'm now right on the other side of the border. I have a friend who has this magical ability to cause me to slip back. From time to time, and I will never understand this, we've been friends for over a decade, from time to time he will go through periods where he will not answer or acknowledge texts or phone calls for months at a time. And so what's my fearful impulse? Doesn't care anymore. You know, recently I went through one of these periods with him, and I'm saying to my wife all the time, he doesn't care about me, he doesn't love me, he doesn't want to be friends anymore because what? If he were friends, he would text me, he'd give me updates. You see, he'd connect. Now, I do think that it's an unfortunate relationship skill, or lack thereof. But in the hands of a fearful, I became utterly convinced that the friendship was over. Now, thankfully, as a counsellor, I still get counselling. And when my counsellor, who's down the road at Bedrock Baptist today, had a session with me, he said, well, Aaron, maybe you should just see if that's for real, and maybe if you're so desperate for connection, you should own getting some connection. And so I explained this to Debbie, and Debbie says, well, shall we invite them over for dinner? And my response is, well, you can try, but they probably won't want to come because they don't like me no more, right? 20 minutes later, Debbie reappears. Yeah, they're coming on Saturday. Okay, well, that's all right. Although it'll be awkward. It's not remotely awkward. At the end of dinner, with tears in their eyes, they said, we haven't told anybody what we're going to tell you, but for the last few months we've been praying about what the next step in our life is, and this is what we think it is, and it's the opposite way. I think we're not friends anymore, and he is telling me, confiding in me, something that he has not yet told anybody. Nothing has changed at all. He still thinks about me the way he always did, but my inability to hold on to the love is the problem. So, this is why I've used the I'm not okay, or I'm okay, you're okay stuff, because it makes it relatively easy to know what to work on. If you're a dismissive, what do you need to work on? Dismissive is I'm okay, you're not okay. What do you have to work on? Right, you're okay. Learning to open the gates, learning to be trustworthy, learning to let other people in. Not everybody, because no dismissive is ever going to do that, but you might like to start with somebody. And if you're an anxious person, what do you need to work on? I'm okay. I can be okay when we're apart. I can work on my emotional object permanence. And let me give you a tactic for working on your emotional object permanence. It's called holding the hug. It's a way of practicing. And holding the hug sounded like this with Debbie. Because I realised that I heard for a long time she would go to bed a lot earlier than me, and that would trigger terrible feelings of separation anxiety. And so holding the hug was Debbie would come to me at bedtime with her and give me a kiss, and she would say something like this to me. This is really good. She said, Aaron, upstairs there are some people sleeping who love you. Now, if you forget that we love you, you feel free to wake us up and we'll tell you. But I just need you to know that upstairs are some people who love you, but they just happen to be sleeping right now. She says, I'm going to go to bed now, but I'm going to leave some of my love down here on the couch with you. And she would give me a hug. Now, what happens next is the holding the hug. As Debbie walks off up the stairs, I hold on to that feeling. What's this feeling like? This feeling of being loved, this feeling of being safe, this feeling of being secure, connected. What's this feeling like? And how long can I hold on to it for? And every night I practiced. Now I realised after a while that it wasn't just Debbie's love I could hold on to. I realised as someone who has faith, I could hold on to God's love. I'd be standing in church services and suddenly feel deeply connected to God, and I'd think, oh God, what's it like to feel close to God? And I'd let that feeling stay with me. And then, if I'm honest, I learned to hold the hug of a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. And here's the thing. It means that wherever I am in the world, I can dial up a hug anytime I need one. That's what holding the hug allows you to do. I can dial up a hug anytime I need one. And that's a powerful, powerful way of moving into I'm okay, you're okay. So, as we finish this section today, particularly if you're with with someone who you have some kind of relationship with, or even if you just fancy sharing with someone who did come with today, why don't you tell them what your attachment style is? What did you see about yourself when you heard the 4 styles? What do you notice in yourself? And what might be some of the behaviours that you exhibit that are kind of symptomatic of that style, that you can now see, oh yeah, I kind of do that in friendships, I do that in romantic relationships, I do that in parenting. That's an impulse from that style. Maybe take a minute to talk to each other and share your style and a symptom of your style with somebody. Right, so our second topic today. The bedrock of all relationships is about trust. And the problem is for many of us, we simply don't know what trust is. We think it's a feeling. We think trust is, I feel like I can trust you, versus I feel that I don't, or I can't. And by having it be a feeling, we turn it into something vulnerable and unhelpful to us. So we're going to move it out of the feeling realm. Now, I'm not saying there are no feelings attached to trust. I'm just saying trust itself needs to be more than a feeling. And today I'm going to give you some tools for actually working out how trustworthy am I, how trustworthy are others. In many respects, we might say that I trust you is a better compliment than I love you, because you may always trust the person you love, but you can always love the person you trust. So that should be a the, not a he. It's a stolen graphic. We're learning today that I need to steal better graphics. Sorry about the quadrant one from earlier. But I like the idea that we don't always trust the people we love. We don't always. Sometimes we know they shouldn't be trusted, but we can always love someone that we trust. We know that the trust is the bedrock for loving them. So we want to work on our trust. And so in the spirit of hearing voices other than my own, let's hear another video. This is a relatively long one, but it's worthwhile, and it's the famous
Today's episode is sponsored by Audible.
What is trust? What do we talk about when we talk about trust? Trust is a big word, right? To hear I trust you or I don't trust you, I don't even know what that means. So I want to know, what is the anatomy of trust? What does that mean? So I started looking into research, and I found a definition from Charles Veltman that I think is the most beautiful definition I've ever heard. And it's simply this: trust is choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Choosing to make something important to you vulnerable to the actions of someone else. Feltman says that distrust is what I have shared with you that is important to me is not safe with you. So I thought, that's true. And Feltman really calls for this, let's understand what trust is. So we went back into all the data to find out, can I figure out what trust is? Do I know what trust is from the data? And I think I do know what trust is. And I put together an acronym, BRAVING, B-R-A-V-I-N-G, braving. Because when we trust, we are braving connection with someone. So what are the parts of trust? B, boundaries. I trust you if you are clear about your boundaries, and you hold them, and you're clear about my boundaries, and you respect them. There is no trust without boundaries. R, reliability. I can only trust you if you do what you say you're going to do, and not once. Reliability, let me tell you what reliability is in research terms. We're always looking for things that are valid and reliable. Any researchers here or research kind of geeks? There's 10 of us. Okay, so we would say a scale that you weigh yourself on is valid if you get on it and it's an accurate weight. 120. Okay. So that would be a very valid scale. I would pay a lot of money for that scale. So that's actually not a valid scale, but we'll pretend for the sake of this. That's a valid scale. A reliable scale is a scale that if I got on it 100 times, it's going to say the same thing every time. So what reliability is you do what you say you're going to do over and over and over again. You cannot gain and earn my trust if you're reliable once, because that's not the definition of reliability. In our working lives, reliability means that we have to be very clear on our limitations so we don't take on so much that we come up short and don't deliver on our commitments. In our personal life, it means the same thing. So when we say to someone, oh God, it was so great seeing you, I'm gonna give you a call and we can have lunch. Yes or no? No. It was really great seeing you. Moment of discomfort, goodbye. Right? But honest. So B, boundaries, R, reliability. A, huge, accountability. I can only trust you if, when you make a mistake, you are willing to own it, apologize for it, and make amends. I can only trust you if when I make a mistake, I am allowed to own it, apologize, and make amends. No accountability, no trust. V, and this one shook me to the core. Vault. The vault. What I share with you, you will hold in confidence. What you share with me, I will hold in confidence. But you know what we don't understand? And this came up over and over again in the research. We don't understand the other side of the vault. That's only one door on the vault. Here's where we lose trust with people. If a good friend comes up to me and says, oh my God, did you hear about Caroline? They're getting a divorce. And it is ugly. I'm pretty sure her partner's cheating. You have just shared something with me that was not yours to share. And now my trust for you, even though you're gossiping and giving me the juice, now my trust for you is completely diminished. Does that make sense? So the vault is not just about the fact that you hold my confidences. It's that in our relationship, I see that you acknowledge confidentiality. Here's the tricky thing about the vault. A lot of times, we share things that are not ours to share as a way to hotwire connection with a friend. Right? If you don't have anything nice to say, come sit next to me. You know, that's our, yes or no? Like, our closeness is built on talking bad about other people. You know what I call that? Common enemy intimacy. What we have is not real. The intimacy we have is built on hating the same people. And that's counterfeit. That's counterfeit trust. That's not real. So the vault means you respect my story, but you respect other people's story. I, integrity. I cannot trust you and be in a trusting relationship with you if you do not act from a place of integrity and encourage me to do the same. So what is integrity? So I came up with this definition because I didn't like any of the ones out there, and that's what I do when I don't like them. I do. I look at the data and I say, what's integrity? Here's what I think integrity is. 3 pieces. It's choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what's fun, fast, or easy, and practicing your values, not just professing your values. Right? I mean, that's integrity. In non-judgment, I can fall apart, ask for help, and be in struggle without being judged by you. And you can fall apart and be in struggle and ask for help without being judged by me. Which is really hard because we're better at helping than we are asking for help. And we think that we've set up trusting relationships with people who really trust us because we're always there to help them. But let me tell you this, if you can't ask for help and they cannot reciprocate that, that is not a trusting relationship, period. And when we assign value to needing help, when I think less of myself for needing help, whether you're conscious of it or not, when you offer help to someone, you think less of them too. You cannot judge yourself for needing help, but not judge others for needing your help. And somewhere in there, if you're like me, you're getting value from being the helper in a relationship. You think that's your worth. But real trust doesn't exist unless help is reciprocal and non-judgment. The last one is G, generosity. Our relationship is only a trusting relationship if you can assume the most generous thing about my words, intentions, and behaviors, and then check in with me. So if I screw up, say something, forget something, you will make a generous assumption and say, yesterday was my mom's 1-year anniversary of her death, and it was really tough for me, and I talked to you about it last month. And I really was hoping that you would have called. But I know you care about me. I know you think it's a big deal, so I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about that. As opposed to not returning calls, not returning emails, and waiting for the moment where you can spring, well, you forgot to call on this important, you'll make a generous assumption about me and check it out. Does that make sense? So we've got boundaries, reliability, accountability, the vault, integrity, non-judgment, and generosity. This is the anatomy of trust, and it's complex. Why do we need to break it down? For a very simple reason. How many of you in here have ever struggled with trust in a relationship? Professional or personal? It should be everybody, statistically, right? And so what you end up saying to someone is, I don't trust you. What do you mean, don't trust me? I love you. I'm so dependable. What do you mean, don't trust me? How do we talk about trust if we can't break it down? What understanding trust gives us is words to say, here's my struggle. You're not reliable with me. You say you're going to do something, I count on it, you don't do it. Or maybe the issue is non-judgment. But we can break it down and talk about it and ask for what we need very specifically, instead of using this huge word that has tons of weight and value around it. We could say, here's specifically what's not working. What's not working is we've got a boundaries issue. So one of the things that's interesting, I think, is one of the biggest casualties with heartbreak and disappointment and failure and our struggle is not just a loss of trust with other people, but the loss of self-trust. When something hard happens in our lives, the first thing we say is, I can't trust myself. I was so stupid. I was so naive. So this braving acronym works with self-trust too. So when something happens, I just recently went through a really tough failure, and I had to ask myself, did I honor my own boundaries? Was I reliable? Can I count on myself? Did I hold myself accountable? Was I really protective of my stories? Did I stay in my integrity? Was I judgmental toward myself? And did I give myself the benefit of the doubt? Was I generous toward myself? Because if braving relationships with other people is braving connection, self-trust is braving self-love, self-respect, the wildest adventure we'll ever take in our whole lives. And so what I would invite you to think about when you think about trust is if your own marble jar is not full, if you can't count on yourself, you can't ask other people to give you what you don't have. So we have to start with self-trust. There's a great quote from Maya Angelou that says, I don't trust people who don't love themselves, but say I love you. She quotes an African proverb when she said that, and she said, be wary of the naked man offering you a shirt. And so a lot of times, if you find yourself in struggle with trust, the thing to examine first is your own marble jar. How you treat yourself, because we can't ask people to give to us something that we do not believe we're worthy of receiving. And you will know you're worthy of receiving it when you trust yourself above everyone else.
If you enjoyed today's presentation, then you will certainly enjoy Bernie.
Thank you for asking. So let's reflect on that video. There's some good stuff in there, isn't there? And can you see how it's a combination or extension of this I'm okay, you're okay thing? You're getting trust from others, you're okay. Look after myself, trust myself, I'm okay. What did you hear in the video that you were like, that's good? I'm glad I heard that. Anybody else? Right, well, we're just going to keep unpacking. So, we've got to be really careful between, this idea that many of us have is that, we will have what's called naive trust. We will trust early. We will trust quickly. And that means if you're doing that, if you get into a relationship and you are trusting quickly, that's not trust. That's naive trust. Because trust is an evidential thing, not a feeling. And so if you don't yet have evidence, you don't really have a basis for trust. You have naive trust, which could easily set you up for future disappointment. You literally don't know the person well enough to give them the certificate of trustworthiness. But we want to, because on the other side of that are people for whom they'll never trust. In fact, I remember, there's only 2 bits of advice my dad gave me growing up that I remember. One is if you had too much to drink, when you're driving home, jam your elbow in the corner of the window, it'll help you keep the car steady. That was number 1. Thank you, Dad. And the second was don't trust anybody. See, now that's the other side of the coin. Naive trust is I'll just trust you because I feel like I can. And my dad's cynical, untrusting capacity, born of pain, born of disappointment, decided I couldn't trust anyone. And we have our story. And this was my dad's story. My dad's name is Adrian. As a child, he was a stutterer. And unusually, he stuttered over his name. Adrian's not normally the sort of word that stutterers have trouble with, but for him, he could not say his name. So in early school years, he was often taunted and asked, "Don't you want to be our friend? Why won't you tell us your name?" So he was deeply embarrassed that he couldn't say the name confidently without stuttering, didn't want to be taunted, so he'd say nothing. So he had no friends right up until he was about 12. My dad was a very gifted sportsman, played for the Canterbury B team in rugby union, was a great cricket player, and he made a friend named Kevin. And Kevin was finally the answer to his friendship needs, and he was friends with Kevin from 12 through 19 when Kevin committed suicide. And then my dad got married, and his first wife cheated on him regularly. Don't trust anyone. But remember, don't trust anyone, it's just the wall that keeps out the pain, that keeps out the love. So we have to be really careful. So we mustn't let trust be a feeling, because it could be a feeling of naivety or it could be the feeling of pain. Now, as William Shakespeare said, love all, trust a few, endure on to none. Trust a few. If you're trusting everyone, it's not trust, because it means you can't tell the difference yet between trustworthy people and untrustworthy people. Because not everybody is worthy of trust. So it's wrong to trust everyone.
Is there a case for trusting everybody once?
It's not trust at that point, is it? The trust is the fruit of evidence. It's the fruit of relationship. It's the fruit of knowing this person can be counted on. And not everybody can be counted on, because everybody in this room is thinking of someone they know is that person that you really shouldn't trust. You really can't be counted on to do the right thing in a relationship with you. For whatever reason, in different ways. Because none of us are trustworthy either, in totality, right? We all have our strengths of trustworthiness and our weaknesses, the areas where we are more fragile. So trust is the fruit of a trustworthy relationship. It's what enables bonding and commitment. And when trust breaks down, of course, fear, conflict, self-condemnation all begin to appear. So this is what we want to focus on today, that trust is earned and maintained with consistent actions. Hence, it's not a feeling. It's actually an adult choice built on evidence. So that I resist my impulse. You see, if you're anxiously attached, you'll trust really quickly, because you will use trust to form a close connection really fast. I need you, I will cling to you, even if you are untrustworthy. So often in counselling, we'll meet anxiously attached women who have fallen in and out of relationship over and over again, falling deeply and quickly for men who they had no right to trust, who then hurt them and disappoint them, break their heart, giving their heart to someone who had earned the right to receive it. So that's why our question is, can I trust you with my heart? Can I trust you? Is it actually the wise choice to trust you? Rather than just, is it a feeling? My feeling could be an impulse. And similarly, of course, a dismissive person, we could think, would struggle to trust anybody because of their will. And a securely attached person trusts the trustworthy because they know they deserve to be loved well, because they love themselves well. So we're going to take a look at some ingredients of trust, and then we're going to do a short little kind of test, so to speak, of trustworthiness, which again, we're going to focus our energy today on ourselves, not on others. We're not here to point fingers, we're here to reflect on how well are we doing at being trustworthy so that others can really connect with us deeply and reliably. What might we need to work on? Well, let's look at some of the ingredients that have been picked up on by Brene, but we're just going to give it some more language. Mutuality. Mutuality is a really important feature of trusting relationships. That the relationship is mutually chosen and therefore the mutual responsibility of all parties to it. Most relationships might require some one-sided giving for periods of time, but in the long run, trustworthiness cannot be maintained without mutual and reciprocal care and mutual concern for the well-being of the relationship. We've both got to be getting something out of this relationship. We're talking about our human relationships, our friendship relationships, our romance relationships. They must be mutually chosen and upheld. They must have a sense of equality about them. So one of the things I'll often do in counselling is I'll ask people to say, well, you know, technically you're husband and wife, but what might be another relationship dynamic that better describes your relationship? And so I'll say, it could be something like parent and child, teacher and student, player and coach, workmates, boss and employee, master and slave, friends, acquaintances, you know, and I'll give them a whole variety of other relationship styles. And time after time, they'll pick one where there's a power imbalance. Oh, we're now caregiver and patient. That's what we've become. The mutuality is gone in the relationship. There's a power imbalance. And for a brief period of time, that's fine. But when that becomes normative of the relationship, it starts to erode. Because the person who is the caregiver, for instance, if that was where the relationship morphed, starts to think, why am I here? What am I getting out of this? You see, it's all well and good. If you are the doctor, if you are the counsellor, then you know you've signed on to be caregiver. But if you didn't sign on to be caregiver, and you realise that's all you are here in this relationship, or that I have to be the parent and you will be the child, and I'll have to clean up your mess and tell you which way is up and rescue you from your mistakes, these erode trust because there's no longer a mutuality. And one of the people in that relationship might start to wonder, am I really choosing to be in this anymore? Number two, availability. Relationships require mutual and ongoing availability. We must be able to claim and provide personal presence, mental and emotional presence. It's not enough to be in the room if you're watching the telly and not engaged. You know, your body's in the room, but the rest of you isn't. Now, there has to be this sense of availability. That there is these times in the relationship where we connect, where we take time to be with each other. And without that, the relationship breaks down. And of course, for many couples, this is the beginning of the problems for them will be the appearance of children. Because children begin to redefine the relationship, and suddenly mother and father starts to overwhelm husband and wife as the primary relationship. And suddenly they are no longer claiming personal presence with each other as husband and wife. Which is why so many relationship things will encourage things like the date night. The date night is this idea of making sure that we make a rhythm of having this moment where it's just the man and the woman being husband and wife. Now, whether it needs to be as clinical and formulative, who knows? But the point is there, right? Debbie and I decided a long time ago that we would try and have a week-long date every year. And that was partly because we were a blended family. When I married Debbie, she had 5-year-old Shannon and 3-year-old Jackson. So we never had any period of time as a couple where we were just a couple. We were an instant family. So in order to cultivate this, we decided every year we go away for a week. We'd have a week-long date. And the kids hated that, and they're annoyed. And that was mainly because we would then go and grab a seat and we bounced around the islands. We'd been to Niue and Tonga and Rarotonga and Numia and Fiji. And we're working our way. We haven't got to Samoa yet. Because we're having our week-long dates, because we recognise there has to be this availability. But more than that, every day, this opportunity to really be present with each other. And not just present, but accessible. So that I have access to the other person's heart. I have access to their inner world. If I don't have access to their inner world, then I can't really build deep trust. If I only know things about you that everybody knows, then I don't feel very intimate with you. This is the reason why counsellors have to be so very careful with clients, because our brains are wired to connect intimacy or disclosure with love. So it's not uncommon for the client to have feelings for the counsellor, for instance, because the only other time I've shared so deeply with somebody, I cared about them. It gets very confusing, right? But that's because it reminds us in good relationships and healthy relationships, we have access to the inner world. What do you think? What do you feel? What are your hopes? What are your fears? We have access to each other. And as we have access to each other, this grows the sense of trustworthiness in the relationship. Can we hold each other's story? Can we be connected to each other? Brene Brown has this wonderful 3 elements to connection, which are just worth noting here. She says, it is this disclosure of the inner life in a non-judgmental way. In other words, I know that if I tell you my stuff, you're not going to go, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're that kind of person. It's going to be acceptable to hear. But thirdly, really interestingly, that we will draw strength from that moment. We will draw strength from that experience. And indeed, I realised as I read this, that's why counselling often works for people. It's that third bit, is that when I've been disclosed my stuff and the counsellor didn't judge me, I draw strength from that. I feel a sense of connection. And we can have that in all of our relationships if we're conscious to look for it. And it's why many of us feel so much better, and we should feel better, when we've had some time with our nearest and dearest people. Fairness in relationship requires mutual accessibility to each other's experience of assets and liabilities, wounding and nourishing in the relationship. Again, so difficult if you're in a relationship with a dismissive who's just not offering up information about themselves, not letting you know what their thoughts and feelings are. Which is doubly bad for men, because in truth, ladies, when you ask us what's on our mind, often the correct answer is nothing. We are not thinking about anything in particular. But it's also a problem that sometimes we are thinking, but we're not sharing. We're not telling you what's really going on. And of course, that breaks down the trust. Number 4, justice. This is so important in a trusting relationship. I need to know that if you blow it and do something wrong, you'll fess up. And that if I blow it, I'll fess up. You cannot trust someone who's incapable of saying, I'm sorry. You shouldn't trust someone who's incapable of saying, I'm sorry is a key attribute. And it's been fascinating because I grew up in a home where my mum says, if you love each other, you don't have to say sorry. Which I informed her a couple of years ago was a toxic belief that would die with her. She didn't seem to appreciate that as much as I thought she would.
That was actually in that film, Love Story. Do you remember that? And that's what the key phrase from that film was, that very saying.
Yeah, except that they never...
And I think a whole generation actually believed it.
And yet, if you actually watch the movie, the next phrase after love means not having to say you're sorry is nonsense. And the movie is not even affirmed as a truth. But you're right, in popular culture. But that idea ran so deep in my mum's family experience that she genuinely believed love meant saying you never had to say sorry. Whereas we knew that actually we wanted to model to the children that the giving and exchanging of forgiveness is how trust is restored. I've done the wrong thing. I am sorry. Could you forgive me? Yes, I forgive you. It's the only way in which relationships can be healed. If there's no mutual attempt and commitment to repair, you can never be close. One person cannot repair. I say this all the time in counselling. It only takes one person to break the trust, but restoring trust is a two-person job. It's a two-person job. It can't be restored unilaterally. I know this because I see it all the time where one person has done something deemed untrustworthy and the other person now refuses to pay attention to any trustworthy behaviours. Retains the right to say, no, I still don't trust you. So building trust is a two-person job, no matter what the relationship is. Number 5, support for multiple loyalties. Each person needs to relate in positive ways to several significant people in their life. And this is where often again our attachment style will interfere. So sadly, I was raised by 2 fearfuls. So that was really difficult. It meant that multiple loyalties were always a problem in our family. Because of the profound sense of relationships being unstable, I grew up in a world where if you loved someone else, then somebody would think, oh, that must mean you don't love me anymore. Rather than being able to actually affirm, human beings are capable of loving lots of people at the same time. And the fact that I love my friend does not mean I love my brother any less. But unfortunately for many of us, these loyalty tests, these terrible sense that what does it mean? And it's because loving others usually means I go through a period of that person being unavailable. What's it like when your partner goes and spends time with a friend and you're left alone? Well, see, if you have a certain relationship attachment style, you might experience separation anxiety, which you might then turn into a loyalty test. Well, if you loved me, you wouldn't hang out with me so often. Rather than being able to affirm, actually, we're capable of loving several people, and it's good and healthy to love several people. So we're going to finish today with a little bit of this section, with a little bit of a test, really. Test with air quotes. Just a chance to reflect. So I'm going to get you to hand out those. Just take one each. I'll drop on the side as well, and I'll take the leftovers at the end. So for the record, you'll find the attachment graph on the second page. But we're going to just quickly look at effectively what could be the 10 Commandments, which we're going to use a little bit of a measuring stick to give yourself a score of trustworthiness. I will not ask you to share your score. I mean, you're welcome to, but I won't ask you to. So, number 1, trustworthy people must be truthful. Trustworthy people know it's not enough to possess the truth must possess them. Do you know that when you ask them a simple statement of truth, that you will get a truthful, factual answer in return? And often that's difficult, isn't it? Because sometimes the impulse towards self-protection means that our impulse will be to lie when asked a question. In fact, I was talking to my son who manages a landscape yard, and we were talking about integrity in the workplace. And he said this, he said, Dad, I learned a long time ago that, if you've forgotten to order the truck to deliver the landscaping stuff, you don't tell the customer the truth. You tell them that there hasn't been enough time for their delivery today. And you realise, we are often encouraged to have these fudged versions of the truth, aren't we? We want to ask ourselves, if someone asks me a plain question, even if the answer is difficult and ugly to admit to, will I give an honest, truthful answer about the facts, about what really happened? Or will I be tempted to fudge it to protect myself from their disappointment or some pain? Number 2, honesty. Trustworthy people are honest. So if truthfulness is about the facts, honesty is about the thoughts and feelings attached to those facts, that kind of deeper level. About what you're really going on for you, the very personal stuff. What's going on deeply for you about that? Will you share your inner world so that there isn't this gap between what I say and what I think? It's this continuity. Continuity is so important. It's part of what it means to be known. As soon as I don't hear continuity, other people are wondering, which is the truth? They said one thing, but it looked like they felt another. They thought another. Or have you ever been in the conversation when you asked someone and they said yes with their mouth, but their eyes said something different? By the way, if you ever do see that, just name it. Say, well, I heard that you said yes, but to be honest, something about the look on your face said that might not be the whole story. What else is true? Not necessarily an evil lie, of course. The person might be saying yes because they think you'd be more pleased to hear the yes, or they're hoping that they can say yes. Number 3, trustworthy people are reliable. They keep their promises. Now, the only thing I really didn't like about Brene Brown's video was that she did make reliability an impossible standard by saying that it was every single time. Perfection is an impossible standard. I think we have to say it's reliable. Now, the scales should say the same number every time, but human relationships are not quite as clinical as a set of scales. But it should be that we know that there's a certain reliability. I remember a friend of mine was an IT manager, and I just loved hearing this story. For his sake, apparently a client had rung up and had made an accusation about my friend. And the friend's boss, the employer, said, well, I've known this man for 10 years, and I'm not even going to ask him if that's true. I know it couldn't be. Wouldn't it be nice to be known like that? To be of such known character and consistent action and behaviour that others would struggle. I remember similarly in a church context where I know a friend of mine had been accused of something and had lost his job. And I sat with him and I said, look, before you start, I've known you far too long to believe a word of it. So we know that that didn't really happen. Tell me what did happen. And you just should have seen the way his whole body just, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for not believing the story and knowing me well enough to know it couldn't possibly be the story. There had to be more to it. And sure enough, there is. So trustworthy people, though, there's this great connection between their words and their actions. So the answer to that, by the way, if you get caught out in that, is to make softer commitments. To say, yeah, I'd like to do, I would certainly love to come to that. Can I tell you on the morning, if I'm still able? We don't make the full commitment, we make an intentional commitment. If the week works out well enough, I would love to come. Can I confirm later? Or yes, I'd like to help you with that, but only for an hour, not for the whole day. Make softer commitments with people. And then if you're able to over-deliver, they'll be pleased, but if you're not able, you'll be able to leave.
One of the greatest things is a time. I'll meet you at 10 o'clock.
Right.
That's just doing me for absolute.
Yeah, well, for some of us.
For so many
Yeah.
people, how is that reality, I mean, yes, you might aim for 10, next thing is 10:15,
Yes.
what's even happened.
My weekly golf partner did not enjoy me the other day when we were playing. I said, actually, our tea time isn't for a couple of minutes yet, because we were in sort of a queue. He goes, oh, but you told me we were playing at 11:15. I said, yes, because I knew that we'd talked for 11:30. And I'd intentionally managed him. He looked at me, Brendan, and said, well, you do know me quite well. Like, I do. Number 4, I wonder how your score is going. Trustworthy people are loyal. I like this. Loyal to those who are not present. By defending those who are absent, we retain and build the trust of those who are present, and that they believe we would do the same for them. Many of you will have seen me in some public arenas over the last few months as the spokesperson for the cannabis campaign, the No Vote. And I've been in public debates. And I go home, on the way home I call by my cousin, Dave, who I really love. And I was sitting with Dave, and he actually echoed this back to me. I said, I'm incredulous that time after time, the people on the other side will mention certain facts that we have actually established aren't really true. And I really can't understand how they keep holding on to this story, and I'm really genuinely curious as to how they managed to do that. And this is what Dave said to me the other night. He said, Aaron, one of the many things I love about you is this, that even though you could use that as evidence to call that person a liar, you remain curious about them. that you are being loyal. I was doing this. I was defending the person I'd just been debating, even though they went in the room. I could have gone to Dave's house and said, those filthy liars telling their story that isn't true, time and time again. But in fact, I found myself defending, like softening the story, genuinely wanting to wonder, did they see it so differently time and time again? And then Dave was echoing back to me, you are showing a trustworthiness to me. That you are defending someone's wrong actions, even though they're not here and it shouldn't really matter. It's interesting. I've not thought of it like that. I just genuinely was curious about the person. Number 5. Quite similar. Trustworthy people are not biased or prejudiced. They strive to attribute good motives to the actions of other people. Well, very similarly, David said to me, you know, I like, Aaron, that you keep saying that you're pretty sure the yes people want the best thing, that the yes people aren't bad people that are thinking differently about you. Ascribing good motives, even though we do disagree about this. This kind of ability to maintain this kind of human and trustworthy perspective on others. I want to believe the best in other people. I want to be that person. Personally, I get a lot out of being that way, because the other way is torturous. You know, so I get something out of it myself, because the alternative is to wander around thinking, can anybody be trusted? And then I can hear my dad's voice in my head. We're all too prone to being too quick to blame, or often too quick to blame others when things don't go as planned. Being quick to question the motives of others is not a sign of trust. You know, when someone is late and doesn't make it at 10 o'clock, it's a good sign of your trustworthiness as to how you would explain that to another person. Why aren't they here yet? And the answer you're about to give is a litmus test on your trustworthiness. Will you say something like, well, Auckland traffic is terrible, or that person has a lot to juggle, a lot on at the moment, and really, you know, they've probably been in a meeting that went too long that they couldn't control. Like, if you are ascribing a good motive, rather than, yeah, well, they're always late, you can't trust them. Oh, ouch. Number 6. Trustworthy people are humble, recognizing that the truth may not always be with them. They interact with others on the assumption that they do not have all the answers and all the insights. They don't have a superior attitude, rather they value the viewpoints, judgments, and experiences of others. And this is where I get to brag on Dave. You see, I realise deep down that Dave probably doesn't agree with me on the cannabis thing, and yet, even though I know deep down he probably doesn't, when we have a conversation about it, he would never let me know that. And not in some disingenuous way, but rather, he just chooses to be genuinely curious. Oh, Aaron, why do you see it that way? And what's important when you see it that way? And when I ask him about it, how can you do this? He goes, because I haven't assumed I'm right. I know that I might be listening out for some critical piece of information that might actually sway me. Which has been fascinating, because I've spent the last 6 months encountering the opposite in public debate. People absolutely convinced that they know the truth, never listening to anybody. And I'm sure if you check your Facebook feed, you'd agree with me that many of us are struggling to learn to be open-minded, to listen to other people. But there's a certain humility, isn't there, and trustworthiness of keeping some space open in the interaction that I might have misunderstood, that I might have got the wrong end of this, that I might have misheard what we said we were going to do, or what you said you were going to do. You said you were going to be here by 10. No, I told you that my meeting finishes at 10. Oh. Well, that makes a difference. Trustworthy people have that space that says, yeah, I'm listening. Maybe I don't know it all. Number 7, they're accountable. They try to recognize, admit, and accept responsibility for their own mistakes. Again, we're back at, if you can't say sorry, it's going to be hard to trust. Number 8, trustworthy people are cooperative. I find this fascinating. This is one we find in the workplace all the time, don't we? People who resist the rules and practices and agreements of others, particularly if the plan is one they don't particularly agree upon. But trustworthy people say, well, even though I don't think this is the best plan in the world, if this is what we are doing, then I'm going to be doing it. I'm going to be participating, even though it isn't my favourite plan, even though I'm not sure it's going to work. I'm not going to be the reason it fails. 2 to go. That's your score, I wonder. Trustworthy people are just. They're just not only to those who are just with them, but also to those who endeavour to injure them. When people hurt us, does that suddenly mean that we permit ourselves to have a certain way of feeling towards them that is unhelpful to the situation? Or can we maintain the sense of justice about it? That yes, even though this is a person who I don't like or who doesn't like me, who see all those mean things to me, in this instance it's still the case that they are right and I am wrong. Or is it the fact that there's someone I don't like who means that they're never right? They couldn't possibly be. It's them. See, trustworthiness is this capacity to overlook some of that stuff and say, well, even though that's someone who's been mean to me in the past, in this instance, I can still do what is right for them and good for them, even though they have hurt me. And finally, in this section today, trustworthy people promote communication and understanding. They're willing to explore, to navigate, to dialogue, to talk it through, to find some type of resolution. You know, I met with a couple just this week whose story was, I don't think we've solved an argument yet. I think every disagreement we've had, we've just come to the end of the conversation and just buried it and moved along. You know, that's going to be really hard for them to trust each other. Trust says, you know what? We're going to have to work on stuff. That this relationship is worth it. Let's fix it. Let's repair it. Let's make the effort. And the trustworthy person says, well, even if you're not making big efforts yet, I'm going to own my part of this relationship. I'm not going to shrink back and wait for you. I'm going to say, you know what? This thing needs to be repaired. I need to do something. I'm available for repair. The other person might not be, but you are. I am available. So I wonder, what was your score? What did you highlight maybe as an area for improvement in today's seminar? All right, so it's a bit hokey, but I do like to keep this in mind because our building blocks today are be aware of my impulses, don't let them run my relationships. Think to myself, what would a securely attached person do? And try and do that. That'll cultivate new impulses. To be thinking, okay, is there the sufficient trust for an intimate connection with this person? And what's the type of trust dynamic that needs work in this relationship? Rather than this blanket statement, I don't trust you, drill it down. What particular part of trusting behaviour needs attention today? All right, that's helpful. Now, because I can't deal with whether you trust me, because that's your choice, but I can work on a specific behaviour that I realise is making it hard for you to trust me. Right? Can grow my trustworthiness, but we need to know in what areas need attention.
I'd appreciate it if you put your cell phone down while you're holding the rope that I'm balancing on over the contact.
Nice, thank you. So, final section is the goal of all of this, of why are we bothering to reflect on attachment? Why are we bothering to become more trustworthy? It's so that we can have deeper intimacy with other human beings. That it's not good for man to be alone. That we were made for each other. We are relational creatures. We're designed to thrive in relationships, and we want to have at least one or two really good relationships at the center of our life. Some people seem to have lots, but to have none seems tragic. Let's try and aim for one or two, shall we? So intimacy is about this idea that I'm being seen and loved for what is seen. That you are seeing into me, the real me, and love the real me. Just yesterday I had a session with a young man. I love to talk to young adults because it's so wonderful to think he's going to get rid of this so early on. We talked about how he had developed this habit of presenting a preferred self to the world. And so he wanted quickly, like so many young men, he says, just tell me how to fix it. I said, right, before we work on how to fix it, let's understand it. And so we started to play it out. And so he started to think about it. He said, yeah, when I go home in the university break, I will tell my parents only about the good grades, but never about the bad grades. And when I'm at university, if someone asked me what grade I got on that assignment, he said, Aaron, to be honest, I'll just lie and tell them a slightly higher number, a slightly higher grade. And as we played it out, he said, and when I go to church, I want to tell other people the ways in which I'm growing and developing my faith. And as we played it out in every area of his life, he was afraid to be seen. And I said to him, what would it be like to disarm all of that, and disable all of that, and to actually be known for who you really are? Good bits and bad bits. He said, I can feel this terrible knot in my stomach. It feels awful to think that somebody would actually see me. And then we kept talking, and then I stopped, and I said, you know how you said before that you'd feel really terrible to be seen? He said, yeah. I said, do you feel that way right now in this moment? He said, no. But I'm seeing you, aren't I? Because you've just confessed to all this stuff to me. Do you feel scared? He goes, no. I said, yeah. How do you feel? I love what he said. He said, I feel like a burden has lifted. Like I'm actually here with you. See, intimacy is the only way we'll ever be truly present in our life and present with others in their life. So we want to cultivate intimacy. Into me, you see. So, we're going to look at some areas of intimacy. Now, this first one definitely should be kept for the romantic relationships in our life. You're going to have far less romantic relationships if you don't keep it exclusive, or you're going to end up in jail. So, today we're talking about, with just respect to that one, we'll leave that one for romantic relationships, physical affection and touch. I want to explain actually how we are made and how physiologically intimacy, just thinking again, just for the romantic relationships, and if you're not in a romantic relationship right now, you can just zone out and think about what we're going to have for lunch. But I want to think about the drug, the neurotransmitter, that is released during two things, during love and empathy and during sex. And it's this drug called oxytocin, this neurotransmitter, which is the bonding neurotransmitter that starts to get released. Now, it's actually present in our non-romantic relationships, because every time we've experienced love and empathy, oxytocin is released. So for me, to see Cousin Dave, who I go and visit all the time, releases oxytocin. As soon as I see him, my body fills with oxytocin. I can sense it going through my bloodstream. I feel bonded to him, connected to him. He's one of my very best friends. And I can sense it, I can sense the bond between us. He is my person, and I am one of his people. Interestingly, oxytocin's job is to provide selective memory and to reduce pain. And that's why oxytocin is released during childbirth. As I often chuckle to myself, if it weren't for oxytocin, there would only be solo children. Because nobody would ever agree to do that again. But it is the fact that oxytocin says to the lady, it wasn't that painful. You could do that again. Alright? Oxytocin covers that over. So it's interesting that it's released there. It's also reduces addictive connections, which is interesting. So oxytocin is the buffer against addiction, which we'll talk about in our final seminar, about the power of connection as the actual antidote to addiction. Because addiction, it turns out, is bonding to things instead of bonding to people. So oxytocin is this neurotransmitter that gets released. And there you go, it gets released during childbirth. It gets released during loving touch. Loving touch. Someone who you want to touch you, gives you a hug, gives you a kiss. You know, you have some oxytocin. During sex, oxytocin is released. During friendship, when we're trusting others, there's oxytocin present. Interesting bit of research, which you can't read because it should be in white, sorry about that. When we trust God, for those who have a faith, there is a study that said that the part of your brain that oxytocin is released in, I'm going to show you next, it's the anterior cingulate cortex here, that in research, if people meditated on God's love for 30 days, that part of their brain grew. The part of your brain that releases oxytocin. Isn't that interesting? So oxytocin is present wherever love and trust and empathy are present. So it's really important to understand the physicality of intimacy. So, yes, it's partly released in sort of sexual intimacy, which is why we might think of in a marriage that sex is the kind of the glue that holds people together, in that it releases oxytocin. Oxytocin needs to be present in lots of other ways. So I often say to couples who are maybe having some trouble with the bedroom part of their life, have you earned the right to go to the bedroom? Is there enough love and trust and empathy that going to the bedroom is what makes sense? Because actually, you just want to fulfill the love, the trust, the empathy you've been growing outside of the bedroom. So there's a physical element to intimacy that needs to be thought about, and particularly in romantic relationships, how important it is to keep touching each other. And I'm aware even, just again in non-sexual ways, but I think of people like my dad, who at 84 lives alone, how important a hug is for him. Realising how many days he might go between another human being touching him, and how touch is a part of the way that our brain knows we're loved. Right? Because we know if we let someone hug us, that we're safe, that we're okay, that we're loved. So we need more hugs. In our family, we have a little phrase that you'll hear every day. Someone will say it to somebody else in our family. You'll hear the phrase, cuddle break. Hear it all the time. I walk past the kitchen, my daughter will be sitting there and she'll say, cuddle break. And that means stop whatever you're doing and have a hug. And we'll stand there for 30 seconds normally, and try to make it as long awkward a hug as possible. 30 seconds is right at an awkward level of, is this over yet? Can I let go yet? But there's oxytocin is being released, you see. And so we have it as a little phrase in our family, cuddle break.
So not therapeutic when you say 20 seconds or longer.
Well, there you go, 20 seconds or longer, but therapeutic hugs. So just when you want to let go is when it's getting good. All right, so let's think about there's a physical element to intimacy. This verbal element is so important. This connecting through talking, and of course, for many, many couples, this is a problem. That there's not a lot of intimacy going on in the talking department. And what I've noticed is that the problem with the talking department is that there's a tendency to want to rush too often to more intimate kind of talk. And so I want to give you a kind of a way of thinking about talk so that you can naturally move deeper and deeper into intimate conversation. And it's simple to think of conversation like the rooms of your house. What kind of conversation would you have with someone who knocked on the front door? A stranger, a courier. We're in the world of couriers and COVID, right? Everything's getting delivered. Well, the courier says, are you Aaron? You say, yes. And can you sign this? Sure. There's a certain very low-level conversation I'll have confidently with the courier, right? But what about when I invite someone into the foyer, the entranceway of the house? I might have a different kind of conversation. Oh, you come to repair the washing machine. Okay, so the washing machine's over there. This is what's been happening with the washing machine. We had a flood the other day. You can still see, right? So now we're sharing slightly more personal information, not sort of stuff I tell the courier. Don't say, hey, courier guy, before you go, can you tell me about the floods? I don't care about the floods, move along. Right, so there's a certain level of conversation now. But I'm not telling the courier about the fact that I'm a really big Warriors fan and I can't wait to see the game on Sunday. That conversation takes place in the lounge. Come up in the lounge. And now we're having another different kind of conversation, where the conversation is more personal. Where it's about things that are very specific to me. Things I like, don't like. That art, my wife did. The game, I'm looking forward to. Warriors last game of the season, terrible, they didn't make it to the finals after the year they had, having lived in Australia, blah, 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 blah. Not very personal though. Happy for most people to know anything I say in the lounge. But then there's another conversation that happens in the bedroom. Where it's another level of disclosure. And in the bedroom, I say things that I don't say in the lounge. I say things that only Debbie's allowed to know. I don't tell other people that stuff. That she has private, personal knowledge of me. She knows what I'm really thinking about next year, what's going to happen when my chaplaincy job ends at the end of the year, what my hopes and dreams are, how I'm feeling today. Personal stuff. So we want to think of conversation moving naturally through the rooms. And too often we want to skip some steps, and we can think, okay, the idea is to get us moved to the next room. Now, here's the way in which I typically would advise that we do that. We try and match the other person, because we don't want to drag them into a room they don't want to go to. So we want to see, will they respond well to this level of conversation? But what happens if I take it that little bit deeper? Are they still interested? Are they still engaging? Will they match me? If I tell them about the Warriors, will they tell me about their hobby? You know, will they, like the tennis match, return the serve? Because every time we've established that, okay, this level of communication is acceptable, we can then choose together, because it's a relationship, whether we'd like to go to the next place. But understanding that intimacy is about this journey from the front door to the bedroom, so to speak. Keeping in mind, we mostly think about romantic relationships too much. That's an AJ, so you don't have to get so scared. That's where we're going. We're moving towards the greater intimacy with the other person. Disclosing more and more private and personal stuff. But if we start in the bedroom, if we offer up stuff that's too deep, too soon, too intimate, and the person is like, no, but I'm still back in the entranceway. What are you doing telling me about your fears about next year? I'm not ready for that. We have to make sure that we gradually move through the house. And realizing that we both must choose to go to the next place. And if at any point someone says, I don't want to go to the next place, then we have to camp out there. Now, whether that's enough for us, well, you know, I certainly as a man have struggled with the fact that most of my male friends want to live in the lounge. And I want to live in the bedroom. So even with my closest male friends, I want to tell them deeply personal, intimate things, and most of them don't want to hear it. They want to play in the lounge, watching the game together. So I've had to learn. Not every friend is up for that. Not every man wants that. And I'll only frighten them away from the lounge as well. You know, they'll leave the house if I try and drag them into an intimate conversation they don't really want. Say again?
And it doesn't mean that you're a bad person.
No, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that that's the style of friendship, that's the style of intimacy, that's where we're up to. Other person's not necessarily comfortable for more. All right, so we're wanting to sheer up the inner life. That's the point. That's the gift of relationship. It's a chance to see the human experience through somebody else's eyes. To understand it in a way you couldn't possibly understand it if you never did. That they see the world differently, that they feel about the world differently, and that you get this private knowledge of them. That's why the dismissive struggle, because of course they typically won't give up private knowledge. That's why they feel uncomfortable when the anxious person they're in a relationship with wants to tell them every little nitty-gritty, intimate, personal detail, and they're like, ah! Why are you telling me stuff like that? You and your crazy feelings. Keep them to yourself. All right? Whereas intimacy says, actually, I want to be known. I want to be known. I want to share this human experience with someone else. Because the most painful part of being human usually is the being alone part. And with that, we talk more specifically about feelings. Now again, I'm sorry for generalizations that are gender stereotype, but the reality is I don't think I've maybe I've had some exceptions, but I can't think of them. But what's certainly the most common thing I'll often hear is from men in couples counselling, where they'll say something like, her feelings don't make sense to me. Her feelings seem too intense for me. That their feelings seem irrational, like they don't even line up with the facts. And I'll try and tell her the facts. Hands up, ladies, who knows that didn't work? Trying to talk her out of the feeling with telling her the facts. Oh yes, there's nothing else with my feeling like being told my feeling is wrong. Yeah, that really helps me. And so I've had to try and cultivate some ways of getting men to think about how to engage with feelings without kind of needing to analyze or judge or assess the quote-unquote truthfulness. And this is what I've come up with. I suggest that we think of these as windows to look through. That in life there are several windows we can look through. And again, I'm sorry that the print is in the wrong colour. So the rational window, which is the one that the man seems to like to look through, is the window that shows things like facts, logic, assessment, these sorts of things. The rational window is good, and we all must look through it. I mean, when you're doing your taxes, I recommend you look through the rational window. All right? But men particularly like to look through the rational window, and the problem is they might only look through that window and struggle to look through another. And it's really good information about facts and logic and assessment to be had through the rational window. But it's not the only window that human beings look through. We also look through the feelings window. And the feelings window is entirely different kind of information. Information that transcends the rational, that transcends logic, because it simply doesn't apply. Thoughts need to respond to logic. Feelings are a different kind of a thing. I had a piece of art up in my office that my wife did. And I often will tell people when we're looking at this, hey, look at this art. It's terrible to look at it through the lens of the rational, because all you're thinking about is the cost of the raw ingredients, whether or not it was a good use of her time to spend so many hours on a piece of art, how much is it really worth, who's going to buy it? Like, these are not the right questions. But if you look at the same art through the feelings window, you ask, what feeling does it evoke in me? Do I like it or not like it? Does it make the room prettier or not prettier? Like, it's a different kind of information. Valuable information. So feelings tells us about things like pleasure and pain and love. I mean, imagine a wedding proposal where he gets down on one knee and says, I have a list of very rational reasons why you're the woman for me.
Try to picture this.
Yeah, well,
Yes.
certainly doesn't. But in reality, men say, finally, entirely irrational things in that moment. You'll make me the happiest man ever. Whatever, dude. You're the prettiest girl I've ever seen. Whatever, dude. Whatever. Is it a factual statement? No, she's not the prettiest girl. Does it matter? No. He's trying to convey a feeling. You're the prettiest girl I care about. When I see you, it's as all other women disappear. That's what he's trying to say, right? The feelings window is a great window. There's information in it that can't be found in the rational window. And then for those of us who have faith, but all of us look through the faith window in some way or another, and when we try and find out things about meaning and purpose and eternity, what does my life matter? What about my life counts? Why is it good that I've been here on planet Earth? That's a good window to look through. The window of meaning. But they're different windows. And the problem is that things get distorted if you look for this other information through the wrong window. So we must learn to look through the different windows together. This is what intimacy around feelings can be about. But I understand that it's a challenge, so I thought I'd enlist one of my favourite internet characters to help.
Men, have you ever gotten in trouble with your lady because you communicated rationally? And has she ever been upset, but you made it worse by trying to be sensible? Big mistakes! Well, make these mistakes no more with the new manuscripts. They'll help you keep your lady happy by telling her what she wants to hear.
I gained weight and these pants don't fit anymore. Am I getting fat?
The objective measurements of your body literally getting bigger have no basis in reality. I don't believe in science. Therefore, you're absolutely not getting fat. You're so brave. You get 7 different scripts to cover you in the 7 most common scenarios that men screw up the most. Like the she's mad at you script. That's not what I meant. You're putting words in my mouth.
It obviously is. I mean, you don't even do any chores around here.
You know what? You are right. Because of the intensity of your emotions and your willingness to keep naming things that I do wrong that are completely unrelated to the first thing we were originally talking about, I can tell that I am wrong. I am sorry. I am wrong with all that I do as well as who I am at the core of my being. Can you ever forgive me despite the fact that my existence is unforgivable? She got a new haircut script.
Hey babe, do you like my new hair?
God, yes. I love it way more than your old style before that is also equal to this one because I've always thought you're just as beautiful as you are now, even though you just got more beautiful than ever. The only thing that can potentially distract me from the sexy flowing beauty of your hair is the deep radiant beauty I see in your eyes right now. I think both of our lives will undoubtedly change for the better because of your new hair. All you have to do is read off the right script and you have no more problems.
Oh my god, babe, I just had such an amazing shopping day. I got like 11 outfits.
How much did you spend?
About $1,100, but they were all on sale, so I saved about $250.
Well, that sounds very reasonable. Spending $1,100 to save $250 is a brilliant way to save money. It will be an honor for me to pay the credit card bill this month, and all your other clothes you have in your overflowing closet obviously wouldn't work to keep wearing because of erosion and the general instability of solid state matter. Furthermore, I'm sure all the high-waisted jeans you bought will not make you look like Steve Urkel. I can't wait to see you in them, beautiful. She's happy because you're telling her what she wants to hear. Do you mind if we watch a little of the game my favorite team's playing?
Well, I really want to watch The Bachelor. Don't you want to watch it?
Of course I want to watch The Bachelor. Perhaps we should also record it so we can watch it again because it is such a deep, soulful show. It's almost too much to take in with just one viewing. The suspense of not knowing what will happen is driving me crazy. I wonder if there will be drama and fighting between the girls while they compete to see who can objectify themselves the most as a way of controlling this one man so that one of them can ultimately use him to fill the void of her daddy issues that she carries. However it plays out, I'm sure it'll end in true love. Is it on yet? I can't wait. Clinical studies have shown that men using manuscripts get in 97% less trouble with their ladies.
So what side of the family do you think we should visit this year for Christmas?
What a very open-minded question, honey. The fact that we've gone to your parents' house for the past 4 years probably means we should go to your parents' house for a 5th year in a row. That sounds like it'd be incredibly fair to me. My family's dead to me. Manuscripts are written by hysterical bleeding women, so you know the work.
Are you ever going to take the garbage out?
I am the worst. I apologize for disrespecting the divine goddess that you are by thinking you might take it out for once. My failure to conform to gender roles that are stereotypically male, while we refuse to let you be held hostage by a single stereotypical female role, shows my weakness in character. I will take it out right away and then get started folding the laundry so that you can be free of toxic masculinity. Stop being an idiot making your lady upset. Get manuscripts today. Click the link in the video description to instantly download the manuscripts for free. And do it now and get free bonus scripts. The She's Not in the Mood script. The Should Women Have the Right to Choose script. And the Cold Shoulder script. Stay safe out there, men.
Awesome. Thank you, JP. All right, so are the kinds of intimacies we finished today? It's important to try and cultivate social intimacy. This was an interesting session I had recently with a couple who were concerned that they didn't have a lot of shared social interests. So this is the story I told them. When I lived in Australia, my mother-in-law came to visit, and we went for a long drive where we went to an animal park. Because Debbie loves to go to animal parks. I've been to a lot of animal parks in my life, thanks to Debbie, lots of bird parks, lots of animal parks. And I noticed a photo when we were reflecting on the photos from the day that showed how to get past not having something in common. That my favourite photo of the day was my photo of Debbie looking at the lions. It wasn't of the lions, it was of her looking at the lions. That my delight wasn't in lions, my delight was in her delight. That watching her be in her happy place, loving being near animals, was what was precious to me. I could care less about the lions. I never think I even glanced over to see them. But I was fixated on watching her look at the lions. And this is part of the into me, you see. And Debbie loves the fact that in all these week dates that we go on, she can be sure that we'll end up somewhere where there's an animal. And I will do things like we went to Hong Kong and we went to Ocean Park, and you're sitting in the crowd and they're saying, you know, who wants to feed the dolphin by hand? And without skipping a beat, I jumped up and yelled at the top of my lungs, my wife does. And they picked her, and now we have photos of her feeding the dolphins. Do I care? No, not about dolphins, but about Debbie knowing that she's seen. That's how we cultivate intimacy. And finally, is this idea of the values and beliefs that drive us. For some of us, that's a much more sort of organised set of beliefs, and that we might have a faith that belongs to a certain religion. But whether or not, it is about this idea that when we are living out together this sense of a grander story than our own, we feel deeply connected. Deeply connected. And this week, this one means more to me than ever, because on Wednesday night, a man who Debbie and I had worked with when we were pastors, named Chris Watini, died in a hospital bed in Brisbane, aged 43. And when we first met Chris and his family, they came to faith, and they had to journey through the death of their teenage daughter, and we walked with them through that. And you know, as Debbie and I reflected, knowing that Chris had died of the same thing, they both had pulmonary hypertension, where your lungs fail and your heart enlarges. That the daughter died 15, he died age 43 this week. And we were saying to each other, this is the interesting narrative, we were pastors for 15 years, and we said to each other this: if all of the 15 years was just for the Watini family, it would have been worth it. And it was our way of cultivating intimacy through the shared meaning. That working with this family was so meaningful to Debbie and I, that we were able to comfort each other through the grief of losing him by knowing that we had this meaning that we attached that was together. We did this together. We worked with that family. It was meaningful and important. Now, it might not be a faith-related thing. That's fine. That's not the point. The point is finding shared meaning together is an amazing kind of intimacy to share, and it's always worth cultivating. So if we can't do well on the social one, maybe we don't like the same hobbies, maybe we could cultivate the meaning one together. It's never too late to find something new. And what wraps all of this up is this commitment. See, commitment says that there's a kind of exclusivity to the relationship that kind of governs it all. This idea is kind of back to that sort of proposal moment where the man says, you're the only woman in the world for me. You're the only one I wish to be with. That kind of commitment generates intimacy. Because you could tell all that stuff to a stranger and it wouldn't make as much of a difference. It wouldn't be as meaningful. It is commitment that gives it a context, that gives it meaning. And that's often an area that we need to keep cultivating with each other, reaffirming our commitments to each other. Who are we to each other? And that's why we need to keep reminding each other that the relationship is a kind of forever thing. So, you'll see that in the second page of the notes, there's a little scale for you to be thinking about in terms of primary relationships for you. Again, you don't have to do this right now, you might want to do it later, but just to kind of be thinking, how are we going in these very areas? Again, it's this helpfulness of not simply saying things like, we need to work on our intimacy. Big broad question, what does that mean? We can break it down and start to think, in all these areas, what's the one that we need to kind of give some attention to? Now, I think there's some validity on, you can approach this in a couple of ways. I think it's as equally valid to work in the place of strength as it is to work in the place of weakness. Because the place of weakness is that kind of barrel metaphor, isn't it? The barrel can only hold as much water as the lowest stave, so you're trying to lift the lowest stave. And that's true, but the problem with only thinking like that is that the lowest stave is the hardest part of the relationship. It's the part that you're finding is coming least easily to you. So I think that needs to be counteracted and balanced with working with the areas that are the strongest as well. Because when we work with the strongest, we're kind of growing some energy for addressing the weakest. So we don't want to just focus on the weakest, but there's a reason it's the weakest. There is some story, I'm sure, as to why it's the hard part of the relationship. So where do we start? Well, this is the bit that I've been waiting all day to tell you. So last time we talked about John Gottman and the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And as we finish today, we want to talk about some of the answers and the key answer that he offers. That intimacy is about developing a relational practice of bidding for connection. And he uses the idea of a bid, much like at an auction. Ever been to a house auction? And the auctioneer inevitably will try and get a high price, right? Who give a million, give a million, give a million, give a million. And nobody's giving a million, right? So what do? Suddenly somebody offers a lower bid and they work their way back up. They might get to a million or beyond. But people are reluctant to start with a high bid. They start with much lower bids. And connection in human relationship is much like this. We want to learn to make bids to each other. An attempt to create some attention, some affirmation, some affection, some connection. Making some signal to the other person, I am ready to connect with you. I want to be with you in some way. And so Gottman suggests that there are 3 sort of behaviours that occur during bids. The first is called turning toward. That is the act of actually reaching. So now I made a stronger bid, a clearer bid, expressed my motives, I gave it some context. So this time I said, oh, okay. And so then she tells me what's going on, and sure enough, she's upset about something. She has a big cry, and we have a big chat. And then later in the day, she rings Debbie and says, that was the best conversation I think I've ever had with Dad. But I resisted the impulse to turn away in response to her turning away. It would be so easy for me to think, she doesn't want me, she doesn't want to connect with me, and turn away and sulking myself. But instead I practiced turning toward, and I bid again. Now, it might be that the problem is, in this case, it was maybe the bid was ambiguous. She thought I was just being polite. But it might have been that the bid was too big. So, I was working with one couple, where we had talked about these bids for connection. And so they'd had a bid for connection to have coffee during the week. They were a married couple that had actually split up and were living in separate places, but were trying to reconcile. The coffee goes well, right? Turning towards the bid for connection is complete. This is his next bid at the beginning of the next counselling session. Aaron, I'm wondering if you would be the celebrant of renewing our vows ceremony. Anyone want to guess what she said next? What the hell are you on about? All we've had is coffee. That's stupid. That's not the thing we're up to. What does she do? Turning against. His bid was far too high. That wasn't the next step. It wasn't the next logical bid.
Go from front door to bedroom. Yeah.
Right, from front door to bedroom. In one step. Good. Imaginary Kit Kat for you. So bids for connection need to go up gradually. And when we receive turning away or turning against, our job is to find a way to stay turning towards. so that when the person is ready in some way for some kind of connection, they find us available. Rather than we've turned our back, we've turned away. So Gottman mentions some nice little ways that we can bid for connection. Some nice easy starting points. To show some interest in my accomplishments. You know, yesterday, my wife had to deliver her Papakura for the Māori Cultural Studies course she was doing at Laidlaw. She had to go on the marae. I knew she was scared about it. So of course, it was a big conversation. How did it go? Well, I used my cue cards and I was a bit nervous, but I smiled a lot, and some people cried a lot. So I was happy that I smiled a lot and I did my best. You know, we had a nice little bid for connection around how did your Papakura go? Share the events of your day with me. Be affectionate with me. Join me in an adventure. And Debbie and our world, we call that the Westie date, where we go to Papakura together. That's the adventure. Hey, in COVID, getting out of the supermarket healthy, that is an adventure. Join me in learning something new. Work on a project with me. Pay attention to what I say. Respond to my joke. Help me relax. Minor bits. Doesn't have to be big things. But we've got to start bidding with each other to have any chance of intimacy, of making it to the bedroom. We have to start bidding. And if the bid gets rejected, remember, the bid is being rejected, not me. There's something about the bid. I was working with one couple. He didn't like the bid of going for a run. He didn't like going for a run. He didn't find it a very connecting experience. He liked the idea of exercise. They're both fit people, active people, but it was not a bid for connection for him. But when they said, well, how about coffee instead of a run, now he accepted that bid. No problem. It was a wrong kind of bid. The bid didn't appeal. Right? And this ends us here with this, which we're going to hand out today. And that is a little game to play. You can play it with friends. You can play it with spouses. Anybody, really. It's a lovely little way of both affirming how much we do know about each other and how much we can learn about each other. This is called the love map game. And that's because Gottman says that part of the into me you see is that we each begin to construct a map, a love map of the other person inside of our heart. We start to know who they are, what they're about, what's important to them, what they dislike. And we do this by cultivating increased knowledge about them. Or to put it this way, you know, the deepest relationships in your life should be the people you know the most about. You have the biggest stockpile of information about their world, their life. And the love map is a fun way of beginning that process. And Debbie and I have thoroughly enjoyed doing the love map from time to time to just play with and remember and explore what are some of those stories. Because we've been married 20 years in February, so it's increasingly unusual now, of course, for us to hear stories we haven't heard. We're mostly hearing the stories for the 100th time now. And smiling as if we haven't heard that story. The love map is a fun way of affirming, you know what? Nobody knows you like I do. And if you don't know something, well, you get to learn it. And by getting to learn it, you've now grown in your intimacy. You've shared with each other.
And you can't remember number 3?
What's number 3?
Yeah, I don't remember that either.
Where do we first meet? Is that the question?
What was I wearing?
What were you wearing?
I remember what he was wearing, don't remember what I was wearing.
Overalls?
Overalls. There you go.
What do you wear?
Yeah. Well, as long as the answer isn't a straitjacket, I think it's going to be okay. So that's something that's some fun to do. Maybe you'll do that this afternoon. And as we finish today, let's ask our question that we ask every time, and that is, what have you learned today? 3 big areas: attachment, trust, and intimacy. Hopefully there's been something in there for you. Maybe I've told you how to suck eggs. I don't know. What are you going to take away from today that you're glad you heard?
That I need, like, with trust, I actually need to be working on trusting myself.
Okay, working on trusting myself, yeah. That's good. Yeah.
I think attachment theory and how that relates to trust and business and previous relationships.
Or yes, reflecting on previous relationships and why certain relationships haven't worked out, friendships, romantic relationships. Yeah, that's good. What else?
I like your explanation about abandonment versus separation anxiety.
Yeah. Aren't they? Yeah. Abandonment is the story, the narrative, to make sense of a feeling. But the feeling, we can be really... Isn't it interesting too when we think of that, how it might be really difficult. Imagine if that young man said to you, you've abandoned me, and you're like, I never abandoned you. But what how different it would be if you'd been able to go, you know, on the other side of that, I can see that being apart is really painful for you. It really triggers some painful feelings, huh? Yeah, I hate being alone. See, it's a different thing, right? The separation anxiety can be cared for and named and loved. But abandonment, of course, becomes a story that's difficult for others to accept. Yeah, interesting. What else?
The windows, you've done the windows.
The windows.
That was really lovely to go through each one
Yeah.
and be able to separate them out. I was just thinking, if I work with one, that's a really cool way of doing it. Just breaking it down.
Yeah. You men have really been grateful to learn that it's okay to look through the feelings window and not have to do their assessing of the facts or their assessing of the story. And they know what to pay attention to the feeling, the emotion, the pain, the whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. With trust is actually a series of attributes. I've now got a pathway back to trusting. Yeah. Someone just doesn't do better, and maybe it helps notice that, you know, people are imperfect, so they're better at some parts than they are at others, rather than just wiping them off as being untrustworthy, but rather they struggle with this part, but they're actually really quite good at that part. That's kind of good to know, right? Yeah, great. Yeah, well, you're looking like you had something to say? No? No? Just looking and smiling. All right, well, I'm going to invite Jo back and she's going to explain just a little bit of feedback that we're asking around the surveys.
Awesome. Yeah.